Hey guys, NVC here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at my brand new system geared toward competitive play, Twitch streaming and YouTube content creation. Now admittedly this has been in the works for quite some time now, but I really wanted to ensure I got all the specific components that I wanted and not just those I could otherwise convince vendors to ship for the video's sake. So where I wasn't able to obtain a certain product, I simply bought it instead, ultimately resulting in a system that's built entirely to my specification. With that said, I did manage to get AMD, Be Quiet and ZOWIE involved. We've been given the 3900X and I've also bought a 3700X for the second system we'll look at in another video. 2 cases, 2 coolers and 2 power supplies, and of course the monitor behind me. But as I'm sure you know by now, this doesn't impact any of my views throughout the video. It's all non-biased and I hope you take it as being completely truthful. But rather than build 2 systems, we also had Scan Computers put them together for us and ship them out. I'd rather skip all the stress testing and troubleshooting, especially when there's 2 systems involved, and having reviewed for them previously and had good experiences with my previous motherboard bundle, it just made sense this time around. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. So first up, let's talk Be Quiet. Now they're a company I previously had the pleasure of working with during my time in esports organisation Dignitas, and I'm certainly a fan of their silent performance approach toward their catalogue of products. It's all in the brand name here, and I ultimately settled on the Dark Base 700 to house both systems. It's a medium-sized case that will fit just about any motherboard you decide to throw at it, and even features an invertible motherboard tray for those that want it. It has plenty of cooling support, with space for up to 360mm radiators, 2 Silent Wing 3 fans pre-installed with up to 9 possible, and more than enough room for additional fans, SSDs and hard drives. The main feature that pushed me toward this over the comparatively similar Silent Base 801 was its front panel USB Type-C port. Otherwise, I'm not sure I'd have a preference between the two. You can also change the minimalistic RGB case lighting through a physical button on the top I/O, which additionally receives power through a small section of metal prongs on the inside of the front panel, i.e. less cable clutter. Many of these panels also have noise dampening material on the interior, which is of course great to see, and dust filters, making for easy cleaning down the road. Inside the case we have that beastly 12-core Ryzen 9 3900X, which is second only to the recently announced 3950X. Obviously there's an entire debate to be had here between both Intel and AMD, particularly at the moment. However, all of AMD's talk regarding latency, particularly on the graphics card side of things, has certainly established them in my eyes as a company I'm ready to get behind. That, and I haven't had an AMD CPU since the Athlon XP 3200 Plus and Phenom 2 Black Edition days, so it's really just about time. I do want to mention now that I have no plans to encode my streams using the CPU in X264 though, and although this is certainly a viable option as explored by many other reviewers, instead I plan to continue using my GPU to encode, but then utilise the additional headroom provided by those extra CPU cores for additional sources, software and devices that run concurrently to broadcast software such as OBS. Now our CPU is cooled by the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4. Initially I was tempted by an all-in-one water cooler, but I really just wanted something both silent and most importantly reliable. Now its maximum noise output is allegedly just 24.3 decibels, however given how cool this CPU appears to run under maximum load, I doubt it'll even hit that. The TLDR is that you can simply place this beast in your system and then never have to worry about things like pump noise or potential failure, i.e. it'll run consistently well over time, and that's what I was looking for at least, a real trooper. Now the CPU and heatsink slot into an X570 ASUS ROG motherboard, the Crosshair 8 Hero Wi-Fi. Admittedly this board is a little overkill for, well, pretty much anyone and everything, and I'll probably never even use the over-the-top Wi-Fi either. But having had great experiences with the Z77 Sabertooth over the last 7 to 8 years, the only way was up, I guess. It also has a metric ton of USB 3.2 Type 1 and 2 ports on the back I/O as well, which is definitely appreciated. So I put my keyboard and mouse on Type 1 with everything else on Type 2, just to satisfy my OCD. In terms of memory, we're rocking 16GB of Corsair Vengeance low profile running at 3600MHz. This set has been optimized for Ryzen and is most definitely enough for everything I'll throw at it simultaneously, and 3600 is certainly the sweet spot for performance, having looked at other reviews from the likes of Gamers Nexus. There are of course other alternatives with faster speeds or slightly lower timings that I'd love to check out in future, but these were priced well and should at least do great for the moment. As for the graphics card, everyone knows that I've reviewed pretty much every tier of EVGA GPU since the 600 series, and whilst I wasn't able to convince them to send anything this time around, I obviously stuck with my previous experience and picked up an RTX 2080 Super XC Ultra. It's a 3-slot card, and again here I prioritise silence in the decision, whereas fans don't actually turn on until absolutely necessary, something I'm familiar with from the previous 1070 Ti. Now, whilst AMD cards are certainly on the rise, and something like the 5700 XT offers a great alternative to, let's say, the 2070 Super in both price and performance, more frames ultimately means less latency, and in this case the 2080 Super made sense at this time. Anyway, the only thing I might have done differently here is use the Darkbake 700's vertical GPU mount that's integrated with an additional PCIe riser cable just because it's so difficult to reach the latch to remove the GPU due to the size of this Dark Rock Pro 4 cooler. Forward thinking toward future reviews and all that. Now, as far as storage is concerned, we're running Windows 10 Pro on a 500GB Samsung 970 EVO Plus M2 PCIe SSD, which is located somewhere beneath that giant GPU. Now, I know the X570 platform does support PCIe 4.0, but I'm really just a Samsung boy at heart, and I do like their Magician software too. It's something I'll definitely change in future if the opportunity arises, but right now it's more than fast enough. A 512GB Samsung 860 EVO SSD has been installed on the back for local recordings, with a second 1TB drive for my primary competitive multiplayer games. It's pretty important to remember that absolutely no system is prone to the occasional game crash, so I want to make sure I can get back into the action as soon as possible, though touch wood, a crash is yet to happen in 2 weeks. Finally, we have a 4TB Western Digital black hard drive for additional storage in games, which is a carryover from my last build. To finish off the internals, there is supposed to be a Creative Sound Blaster AE9 PCIe sound card installed, which is why you can see that spare power cable below the GPU doing, well, nothing. In the interest of transparency, there is an issue with the current AGESA 1.0.0.4 BIOS that dropped earlier this month, and that's on the majority of X570 motherboards, meaning it needs to stay out until it's been patched. That, or I could roll back to the previous 0.3 BIOS, but there are certainly some significant performance benefits that keep me with 0.4. Both AMD and the motherboard vendors are aware of this issue though, and I'm happy to stick with onboard audio until it's ready, to which I do suppose that Crosshair board has had its benefits after all. Taking an overall look at the two systems though, I can safely say that Scan have done an absolutely fantastic job with putting them together, particularly with cable management. That Darkbake 700 certainly has ample routing options, particularly both above and below the motherboard, and the easily removable PSU shroud and its top covers was certainly a welcomed addition when routing the cables for my sound card and WD black drive on its arrival. So ZOWIE were kind enough to ship out one of their XL2540 monitors, and so for the majority of our in-game benchmarks, we'll be running 1080p at 240Hz. All benchmarks were recorded 3 times over for the sake of fairness, and have been recorded using Afterburner and then captured on a separate run using GeForce Experience, meaning that the listed results you see are free of any performance hit that's encountered by GFE. For our first benchmark, we're taking a look at Forza Horizon 4. In my opinion, it's still by far the best looking arcade racer out there, and our system allowed us to max absolutely everything out with ease. An average frame rate of 161 and a minimum of 137 means we're way above 120 at all times, and the experience is nothing short of fluid. If I wasn't already convinced by the Xbox Game Pass for the Halo Master Chief Collection, it might just be for this game. That and the Forza Lego DLC looks hilariously awesome too. Please note we are unable to utilise the Afterburner overlay and benchmark for this title though, so results for this one alone are directly from the in-game benchmark results. Crysis 3 is a relatively old game now, but it surprisingly features the most impressive implementation of SMAA2TX to date, with absolutely no blur. I'm sure there's a very legitimate reason for why Crytek have managed to do this, but other and more modern games cannot, but that'll be a discussion for another video. The game still looks damn gorgeous today though, and although our minimum frame rate did drop to 70, there's an asterisk attached since it did happen at the same point in all 3 runs through an unavoidable slowdown or stutter, likely due to an issue within the game or perhaps my mechanical drive. It will be nice to look back at all of my older GPU reviews to compare results here too, since I've benchmarked this game for as long as I can remember. Another old game up next is Grand Theft Auto 5. It's seen a relatively recent rise in popularity thanks to role players on Twitch, and you could even mod the hell out of it using the vast amount of realism mods that are available. We've used the last section of the benchmark for this segment, and you could even drop a bunch of those settings down if you'd like to raise that minimum of 87 to stay above 120 at all times. That said, this number was few and far in between, with our system holding an impressive average of 144. Thrones of Britannia is not a game I personally play, but I know the Total War series is beloved by many of you out there. The developers were gracious enough to provide a key last year, and so I've decided to include it yet again. Another asterisk for our minimum frame rate returns, as it was certainly an anomaly, but impressive performance and visuals across the board with an average of 106 frames per second, especially considering the amount of action we're seeing on screen. Now, I've been waiting an age to play through Metro Exodus since release, and I absolutely wanted to max everything out. The immersion experienced in the original remains nearly unrivaled for me, and I can't wait to get stuck into this third edition. That, and I might even consider using RTX, so I've included results for that too, but we'll see. Because ultimately, for first-person shooters, even those in single player, I just prefer visual clarity and smoothness. It is important to note that this benchmark is far more demanding than the game itself, and that's for whatever reason, so do take these results as being worst case, but I think I'll be playing through this game on high and reserve that ultra setting for the 2080 Ti or potentially 30 series next generation. Rainbow Six Siege is our only multiplayer title that features an in-game benchmark system, and considering that Ubisoft continue to support it as a competitive and esports title, it's fitting we include two sets of results, one with a maxed out config and the other with a competitive. Without streaming though, and on the competitive setup, we stay above 240 frames at all times, which is downright incredible. This system is definitely the best way to play Siege, period. So one of the main reasons for upgrading was to allow me to continue streaming newer titles at decent frames per second. Now I'm a competitive player through and through, and particularly with a 240Hz monitor, even though I am using variable refresh rate, I still want to stay as close to 240 as possible at all times. I've included benchmarks while streaming with OBS for 720p, 900p and 1080p, utilising GeForce Experience, and then OBS with X264 and NVENC. As we can see, encoding on the GPU is absolutely the way to go, particularly with the recent encoding enhancements on the RTX line of cards. That doesn't, however, mean that the Ryzen doesn't have its benefits, which we'll look at in a moment, but considering the bitrate required to broadcast on Twitch, 900p with NVENC will be my output of choice moving forward. So after settling on 900p for my stream, I now want to expand on this to include additional benchmark results along with their respective CPU usage statistics for a bunch of different Logitech Brio webcam resolutions and frame rates in OBS. This is because your in-game frame rate can actually be impacted based on your CPU usage, so things like webcams, eye trackers, NDI feeds, and even heavy browser sources all contribute toward it. I already know going in that I'd continue using NVENC even with the Ryzen, and this is where I expected to see the benefits, because for example on my old system I had to turn down my camera all the way to 360p in-game. As you can see though, this is absolutely a non-issue on the Ryzen 9, and you can ramp it up much further before you'll notice the point of impact. Meaning you'll never need to change the webcam resolution from scene to scene, and you can potentially use multiple without worry. That, and we're only just touching the surface too. We haven't even begun to look at other devices or lassoing certain things to certain CPU cores in an effort to alleviate any perceivable impact. So to summarize this system's performance would be to state that I can safely say, and with absolute confidence, that I picked my components well. Now we could sit here and debate the frame rate differences between this Ryzen 9 3900X, the Ryzen 7 3700X, and the other CPUs that are available on the market today, but ultimately it really is the perfect build for me to enter into 2020. It's deadly quiet in pretty much every scenario, and I can multitask like a monster thanks to the incredible amount of headroom on offer by both the CPU and 16GB of DDR4 memory. Streaming is an absolute breeze, and as demonstrated, I can even ramp up the webcam resolution without worrying about a noticeable performance impact, and add things like eye trackers and additional sources, which is awesome. In an era of battle royale, frames win games though, and if you're still running a system with DDR3 memory, and that's of course just to quickly categorize a bunch of you, then I think now's the time to upgrade, since like me, the jump you'll get from these recent systems, particularly on the minimum frame rate side of things, is honestly ridiculous. Now I also love that people on the previous X370 and X470 platforms can choose to throw in one of these latest processors. Sure, you miss out on PCIe 4.0, but it's not really needed for the GPU yet, and judging by the speeds I'm getting on my Samsung 970 EVO M2, I'm not sure it's entirely necessary just yet. But whilst we don't yet know the longevity of X570, the future certainly looks bright for those like me that have chosen to adopt early, and that's my point. It is a little annoying that I can't use my AE9 sound card though due to a BIOS issue, but considering that crept in from 0.3 to 0.4 and will likely be fixed in 0.5, it's really a non-issue and I can definitely let it slide. I personally left it for so many years, too many years even, to move away from my overclocked i7-3770K, but this CPU is testament that it was finally time, and boy, I'm not disappointed. I know the video has primarily featured single player and developer created in-game benchmarks, but it is not without good reason. There is of course some multiplayer gameplay in the background, but it's just near impossible to recreate the same scenario more than once. Really do miss demo support, and it needs to be in more games, particularly competitive ones, as esports gets bigger and bigger year on year. I will, however, be streaming with the system every day, so if you do have any requests, then make sure to stop by, put it in, and if I've got time, I'll give you a live demonstration when I have a moment. Anyway, that about wraps it up. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know down below. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content from this system in future. Absolutely everything is going to be recorded using it, and I cannot wait to get stuck in. But for now, take care, keep gaming. A shout out once again to AMD and Be Quiet for getting involved in this system, and I'll see you in the next video.